Hi. Dean Veloso, Dean Stabile, distinguished faculty, staff, proud family and friends, and above all, dear class of December 2025. Standing here today brings back to 2004 when I sat exactly where you are now, wondering where the world would look like in 10 or 20 years. Back then, we had uncertainty and we had absolutely no idea how the future would twist and bend in ways that no textbook, no INSEAD case study or otherwise had predicted. And yet, here we are today, still learning, still evolving, still pivoting, still proving that an INSEAD education is far less about having the answers and far more about adapting when the answers evidently will change. When I applied to INSEAD, I was newly married. I wanted to switch my career from being an engineer to something more commercial. Back in the 2000s, Thomas Friedman's new book, The World is Flat, was making its rounds, and globalization was the mantra of the early 2000s. INSEAD offered the perfect pitch, a global business school with classmates from all over the world to prepare us for this new world. I'm a switcher and experienced both the Singapore and Fonty lifestyle, which hopefully would give me a more international experience. As an engineer, I was trained in structure, in logic, and in precision, and I wanted the commercial and human lens, the unpredictable space where decisions shape markets, societies, and lives. INSEAD became the bridge between the world I knew and the world that I wanted to shape. I was Singapore starter. Most of my classmates were actually nervous about coming to Singapore. Singapore had just emerged from SARS, and the city was still recovering reputationally. But lucky for us, Singapore was the poster child of globalization: clean, efficient, fast-moving, and deeply international. Within 2 weeks, everybody had settled into Singapore and fell in love with the place. Singapore felt like a crossroads, compact, dynamic, relentlessly forward-looking. Our campus was then tiny compared to what you have experienced today. Fontainebleau had its chateau and parties. We had one humble modern block framed by tropical heat, friendly staff, and 30 over nationalities trying to negotiate leadership assignments. We ate at hawker centers, plastic chairs, steaming plates, shared tables. Everyone except me lived at the Dover or Hermitage. Studying on weekends was mostly happening on the beaches of Bintan and Batam, and the condos that felt like frat dorms during the week. Singapore rewards curiosity. It attracts talent, the way gravity attracts falling stars. And at that time, EDB was offering INSEAD graduates a PR to stay and work here. And I was thrilled to show people my home. But life at INSEAD wasn't only about cases, frameworks, or exams. During exam week, 2 major construction accidents happened in Singapore, including the collapse of Nicole Highway, and a construction accident happened right next to us at Fusion Poplars, which at that time had not yet been built. Lives were lost. My foreign classmates turned to me and asked, "How do Singaporeans feel? How is the country reacting? How could this have happened?" I felt very embarrassed and humbled. I had been proudly showcasing the beauty of my country, but suddenly we were confronted with the hidden cost of rapid development, the safety of foreign workers, the pressure of growth, and the fragility behind the skyline. It was a wake-up call and a reminder that leadership isn't only measured by GDP, but also by empathy. I remember my first day at INSEAD and realized that only 10% of the Singapore intake were women. We were rare enough to count on my 2 hands. It was even worse than my engineering cohort. My study group was a beautiful blend of personalities. There was an American, a Brazilian, a German, a Frenchman, and me. One night, everything in our study group broke open. During a late-night debate in the library, where two of my study mates were both alone, a tall male teammate leaned aggressively over a petite female teammate. Voices raised, tempers escalated. He thought he was arguing the case by leaning over 2 centimeters from her face. She felt physically unsafe, and she filed a complaint. He apologized. At that moment, the incident was brushed aside in the peers as an easy label, she's American. But it wasn't. It was a blind spot. The cohort split and people took sides. Some said she was overreacting. Others insisted that she was absolutely right. And what fascinated to me was this, which were that people from similar cultures tended to share the same interpretation, a reminder that culture does shape perception. And because we had no language for conflict resolution, no structured way to clear issues, that one moment fractured the group for the rest of the year. Years later, I personally found myself in a similar situation. I was in a foreign country. I was surrounded by very tall men after a committee dinner, and I personally felt a little bit uncomfortable and acutely aware of my vulnerability. I quietly excused myself and left the committee soon after. 10 years later, I remained friends with every person in that room. But the fact was that I didn't like late-night socializing in environments that I didn't feel safe. And in that split second, I finally understood what my classmate had felt so many years earlier: the alarm, the loss of psychological safety, the urge to remove oneself from the situation. And that experience really taught me something about leadership. When you reach senior management, inclusion isn't about policies. It isn't about slogans or fancy words. It's about building a platform where your best talent, regardless of gender, of size, of nationality or personality, can perform without fear. And all this happened long before the world spoke about DEI, no inclusivity workshops, no vocabulary for psychological safety. We learned these lessons the raw way, through discomfort, through empathy, accountability, and the willingness to examine our blind spots. At INSEAD, not all lessons came with conflict. Some came with a lot of joy. One of my most cherished friendships was a French classmate who decided that she wanted to learn Malay with me. So we sat together, conjugating verbs, laughing at our terrible accents, and discovering that language is a portal into culture, migration, and history. She was the quintessential McKinsey partner, analytical, structured, formidable. She told me with pride how in 3 generations, her family had went from farmer to polytechnic. And her dream at even 20 years ago was to become a McKinsey partner. Last year, I reached out, as I often do, and realized that she had quit McKinsey. I never thought that would be possible. And she's now doing a PhD in anthropology. And that's what INSEAD does. It introduces you to a dynamic, interesting people. We have an idea of what we want to do after graduation, but as we understand ourselves, as our environments change, we also pivot and decide what it is, where we want to apply our talents. When I went to INSEAD, France at that time was the only country openly skeptical of globalization. That was front page news when I was living in my quaint little French village. And you could imagine that the rest of us from Singapore bright-eyed MBAs, and fierce capitalists believed globalization was inevitable, unstoppable, and unquestionably good. Fast forward to my 15-year reunion, our professors were no longer talking about global integration or globalization. They were talking about the hollowing of American middle class, about geopolitical fragmentation, about the fractures globalization created, and whether we were now witnessing a global retreat. And it struck me that our generation, our MBA generation, had lived through the rise of globalization and also its consequences. While at INSEAD, I took every entrepreneurial track available. Our team, I remembered, was placed second in a business case competition, and my teammates then went on to chase the great China offshoring boom, the dream of the early 2000s. They lived the MBA textbook in real time: shareholder battles, acquisitions, cost arbitrage between developed and emerging markets. They didn't just study globalization, they were inside its engine room. And then, over the next decade, they also lived the backlash: rising wages, geopolitical tensions, the rewiring of global trade. And that's what hits us. We thought the world was going a certain way. We chose our path, which we thought was certain. But in reality, as a graduating class, we created our own history. And we are living history right now again. And we will continue to live history and shape history for the rest of our lives. The world does not move in straight lines. Predictions will fail, systems will shift, industries will boom, rise, fall, and be reinvented. But one thing endures. Your INSEAD superpower is not foresight. It's the ability to pivot with integrity, to see the world clearly, even as it changes, to adapt without losing your values, and to lead through uncertainty rather than fear it. And that, more than anything else, is the leadership that the world needs right now. In my class, I would say INSEAD produces bankers, consultants, CEOs. But it also produces people who bend the arc of world towards building something special. And I have classmates who have lived this life. My Canadian classmate founded a social enterprise in Rwanda that brought clean energy solutions to families living below the poverty line. His work tackled poverty, not as a case study, but in real villages with real children and real futures. My Dutch classmate moved to Zambia to work with the United Nations, dedicating his life to strengthening governance and development systems. These people worked the life less trodden. They expanded what success could mean with an MBA. Impact is not the opposite of ambition. Impact is ambition with a conscience. Over the years, my friendships have grown beyond my own cohort to the ones before and after. We still have our WhatsApp groups. We still party together. In fact, today I do angel investing with another INSEAD alum. She brings a tech background. I bring my manufacturing experience. Different industries, different years, different strengths, but the same values. This is the essence of the INSEAD network. Different worlds shaped with the same purpose. So remember, your network is not a list of names. It is a global constellation of high achievers who share curiosity, generosity, ambition. Use it, nurture it, give back to it, and it will carry you further than you can imagine. As you leave INSEAD, the world will expect you to be polished, confident, and certain. But I hope you will leave with something far more powerful: a willingness to learn, a willingness to listen, a willingness to pivot, a willingness to lead with values, not ego. Your predictions will not always be right. Your first instinct will not be perfect, and your career will not be linear. But you will adapt, you will reinvent, and you will shape a world that desperately needs principled leaders. History shapes your starting point, character shapes your trajectory, and courage will shape your legacy. 20 years after graduating, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. INSEAD will stay with you in the friends you keep, in the decisions you make, in the businesses you build, in the societies you shape, in the leaders you become. So go forward, thoughtful, curious, bold, and deeply human. Write your own history, build your own path, and make this wild, unpredictable world a little bit better because you walk through it with purpose. Congratulations, class of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for sharing reflections on how the world has changed and reflections on how INSEAD prepared you for that change and reflections on how INSEAD was for you. I think many of your experiences probably ring true for our graduates. The one that they would not be familiar with is this idea of going to the beach on the weekend so that's different for them, but everything else I'm sure reflected.